everybody, and welcome to our Serie A Chronicles Tifosi Patreon Q&A special. It's myself, Nicky Bandini, and Patrick Kendrick here to answer some of your questions that you have been sharing with us on the Patreon app. Please do keep these coming, by the way. I know we've had a little bit of a break since we last did a Q&A special. We're going to try to make these a regular part of the rotation again, because it's nice to have that back and forth with you guys, because it helps us to answer questions that you would like answered. So if you're listening to this, whether you're new or have been around for a while, please do keep sending us your questions. We won't necessarily get to them every week, but we're going to try and make it a fixture to come back and do these Q&A episodes at regular intervals. Patrick, I'm going to dive straight into this one. We've got two questions actually about Thiago Motta. So I'll tell you what, I'm going to read them both out and let's discuss them both together.
Let's do it.
The first one is from Manu Alcala, who asks, what has Thiago Motta changed between his disastrous spell at Genoa compared to his current success at Bologna? We were talking about Bologna on the main show this week. They are, of course, fourth in the Serie A table right now, having won 5 games in a row. There's a follow-up question as well from Jill, who asks, can I add on to this question to ask for the group's opinion on where Motta should go after Bologna? In your opinion, should he stay in Serie A for his next step or move to another league? Obviously dependent on which clubs have an opening, but if the following are open to him, for example, Milan, Liverpool, Barcelona, PSG. So let's answer the first bit
Let
first.
me just scribble down those teams. Milan, Liverpool, PSG and Barcelona. Wow. I mean, if he had the pick of even of one of those clubs, I would suggest he would go there, to be honest. But
some big names. Let's do the first bit first and talk about how he's got to the point where he's in that conversation.
Sure.
Then we'll come to that.
There's a lot to get to first here. I mean, looking back at the numbers from his spell in charge of Genoa, he was only in charge for 10 matches, and he came in mid-season, and that's a Genoa side that was consistently battling relegation, and eventually they would succumb to relegation. Lest we forget, they're only back in Serie A this season, having been promoted as runners-up last season. And now there seems to be a bit of stability in terms of the sporting director, and the head coach, Gilardino's doing very well. But this was a Genoa side that was consistently chopping and changing coaches. And I don't think Thiago Motta is necessarily the man for a crisis. We spoke about... put it this way, I don't think that's his speciality, is coming in and being a firefighter and really making big decisions and big changes to get a quick fix, as we've seen in the way of perhaps Davide Nicola has done recently with Empoli. I think he's more of a project builder. I think he's someone who benefits from having time to work with the players on the training ground, full pre-season. I mean, coming in mid-season is never easy, especially when you're in a relegation battle. And if you don't get results very quickly, then suddenly, it's you're under pressure, and then how do you strike the right balance between trying to introduce your notions of play, your footballing principles, and also just picking the strongest team and the best possible system to get a result? So I think there's something in that. Having said that, when he came into Bologna, he came in mid-season because Sinisa Mihajlovic was dismissed. And if we actually go back in time, it was quite a controversial pick, Thiago Motta, on the sense that Roberto De Zerbi came out and said, I would never take that job because I don't think it's fair. Mihajlovic he's unwell, and I don't think anyone should be taking that job, which I thought was a little bit unfair from De Zerbi at the time. Thiago Motta has since shown that it was a very good decision from a professional footballing perspective, both from him and from the club himself. But I think his stock has continually risen. He kept Spezia in the division as well, which Vincenzo Italiano had managed. So I think part of this is simply a young coach, young in terms of experience, just getting to grips with things, trying things out, trial and error, making mistakes, learning from those mistakes, learning how to conduct yourself with a certain president, with a certain ownership group, with a group of players who can I trust, who can't I trust, what system do I want to play, how do I want to play? And of course, you can produce a much more expansive style of football when you have better players to pick from. And I think he has that now. So I don't think it's black and white. I don't think it's suddenly he was a disaster at Genoa and all of a sudden he's a phenomenon at Bologna. I think this is a gradual process, and along the way there have been certain steps and stages of development.
Yeah, I think he's absolutely. Everything you've just said is spot on about opportunities and about what you're being asked to do in a different setting and what you've got the opportunity to do. There's clubs that you come into mid-season where you're firefighting, and there's clubs where you come into, and yes, very difficult circumstances with Sinisa Mihailovic's illness and subsequent passing away, and what you are up against in that circumstance is just different. And it was a controversial job to take for all the reasons you just said, and some people were really unhappy that there was a change of manager made. But I think in terms of the actual football side of things, there was immediately a certain amount from the ownership of freedom given to him and patience shown to him to do what he wanted. And I think that we actually had an interesting conversation on the main podcast this week about Daniele De Rossi and his strengths and weaknesses. And I think that with Motta, it's a very different story. What stands out with Motta right away, when you go back to when he's working with the Paris Saint-Germain youth team, he has very clear ideas of what he wants from football. He has very clear tactical visions of how he wants football to be played. And this was something he got ridiculed for, because there was this quote given in an interview where he said that his ideal formation was a 2-7-2, and people, of course, first of all, add up 2-7-2 and realize that includes the goalkeeper. Second of all, think you can't have 7 midfielders and 2 defenders. And actually what that speaks to is, when you listen properly to what he said, rather than just take that 2-7-2 and run with it, is actually a vision of football that ties together with what lots of top managers are doing these days, which is incredibly fluid hybrid football teams. That's what Simone Inzaghi has made it Inter, is a team where you can see Stefan de Vrij rampaging forward on the attack as part of a Champions League knockout game, because the team adapts and molds itself around one player going, and players drop and adjust accordingly. And that's what he's set out to do at Bologna, and he's been given the time to do at Bologna. I'm not saying they're playing at the level of, or in exactly the same way as an Inter or a Barcelona or a Manchester City, but that's the idea. The idea is we can flow and be fluid, and everyone's working for each other. And I think that there are big picture parts of that. There's something in my mind which is completely intangible, which is Bologna is this famously left-wing city in Italy, so this socialist idea of football fits very well with the environment. But there's also more tangible things that you can point to, some of which are almost circumstantial in some degree, which is, for 2 years, Marko Arnautovic was this pillar at the front of the team that everything was built around. By the end of his first season at Bologna, first half season, you already had a tension building between Motta and Arnautovic, because Motta was saying, you're not a fixed starter, you're not getting to play every game. And then conveniently, Inter showed up with an offer for Arnautovic, which was big enough that the club could say, we have to accept this for a 34-year-old. And then Thiago Motta can get a striker, Joshua Zirkzee, who fits his model of football much better. The way he wants to play football, he wants that really mobile front man who's going to drop into midfield, who's going to vacate his space, who's going to. So there's the big picture and there's the little picture. But I think that all of the circumstances have fell together very well for Motta at Bologna, and it's just, he's been given the time and the freedom to play football how he wants, and he's also got the players who want to do it for him. I think that Lewis Ferguson's a great example of someone who we still don't know what Lewis Ferguson's ceiling is, but he actually has barely played for the Scotland national team. Now, Scotland, without wanting to upset any Scottish listeners, it's not a nation overwhelmingly
it's quite a good generation
abundant
at the moment, I think, isn't it?
That's
to be
true.
fair, yeah,
that is true. But it's not a generation that you think can just discard someone who's doing as well as Lewis Ferguson has. And they're not discarding him, but I think it says something that he hasn't had loads and loads of opportunities. Because is he a brilliant footballer, or is he a footballer who's just extremely right for Thiago Motta and is being incredibly selfless when he needs to be, is working for the team in the ways he needs to? I think it can be both. I'm not trying to do down Lewis Ferguson either, but I think that in terms of the character of the players he's got in that Bologna squad, he's got a lot of those sorts of players who are at the point in their careers where they have a point to prove and are willing to do exactly what their manager asks in the service of a team that's succeeding.
And the numbers are eye-catching as well for Ferguson scoring goals from midfield, but a lot of that is what you said about Zirkzee coming short and therefore vacating space for midfield runners to break into. Just one final thought on Thiago Motta, again coming back to the initial part of the question about Genoa. I've actually pulled up the coaches that Genoa had between Gasperini leaving the club in 2016. So they then had, between 2016 and Ivan Juric had a full season, Juric, Mandorlini, Juric, Ballardini, Juric, Prandelli, Andreazzoli, then Thiago Motta, then Davide Nicola, Rolando Maran, Ballardini, Shevchenko, Conco on an interim basis, which is laughable because most of those are essentially interim bases, given that they were all sacked mid-season, and Alexander Blessin. So, I mean, you've got double figures of coaches there in a window between 2017 and 2022. So they're averaging basically less than half a season. And I would, challenge any coach to be able to thrive and perform in those circumstances. He got a full season at Spezia, kept them up, and that's what attracted Bologna to him in the first place. So I think that's the first bit. Then we had these four massive clubs, didn't we? Milan, Liverpool, PSG, and Barcelona. So, Nicky, if all of those were vacant, and obviously two of them are definitely going to be in Barcelona and Liverpool, should we start with those two?
Well, I actually, before we even start, want to say if we're talking these clubs, then why not throw one more into the mix, which is another big club that's going to have a vacancy, which is Bayern Munich. Bayern Munich is not going to be managed by Thomas Tuchel next season. We don't know who's going in there now. Am I saying Thiago Motta goes to Bayern Munich? I think probably not, but I don't think he's going to Liverpool either. So why not open it up? I think we talked about, again, on the main show, this quote from Aurelio De Laurentiis in an interview he gave not long ago, where he said that he had a 6-hour interview with Thiago Motta about the Napoli job in the summer, but Motta gave him an indication that he was more interested in opportunities abroad. Now, I think if Thiago Motta came and gave you a 6-hour interview, he at least wanted to hear what you had to say. And in my head, listening to that, if it's even a true account, but if it is a true account of what happened, the question in my head is that like one of those polite ways you decline someone? The "it's not you, it's me" answer to give Napoli is, "Oh, I'd rather coach abroad," but actually maybe it's just you don't want to coach Napoli. So would he take
that door now closed? Would he take the Napoli job a year on? In the sense that you go there with very low expectations, they might not be in the Champions League. Do you then suddenly think, it worked well for me one game a week at Bologna with this Napoli squad? Suddenly, can I re-establish them in the Champions League? Can I maybe go for? Or do you think that they've drawn a line under that now? You can't turn down De Laurentiis and expect him to come calling again.
I think De Laurentiis would come calling again. I think it would depend what's on the table. Right now, Bologna look more likely to have Champions League football next season. So would you walk away from that to go to Napoli? Coaches have made that sort of move before.
Pay rise.
But I don't know if he would. And would you give up the project that you've already been working on for a less certain one, especially with expectations that, for instance, Victor Osimhen's going? What promises are you being made in terms of squad reinforcement? I don't think that would be a clear-cut step up for him at this point. Again, we can revisit at the end of the season and see where the standings are and who's going to what European competitions. I think the Milan job would certainly be a step up. I think that's a really potentially interesting spot for him in terms of that is a club that's invested in young players, that's trying to build a new project, that perhaps after Pioli would feel still like a place that you could walk into and create something and put your identity on it with players who, again, have that hunger and willingness to learn. I think they've done a good job of assembling that sort of group at Milan.
But this is someone who won the treble with Inter, going to Milan as head coach.
Well, there is that. Yes, there is that club connection, and Motta has sort of shown those connections matter to him, hasn't he, at times? So possible, but not obvious. I just can't see Liverpool coming to him. I don't think he's yet established his profile at a high enough level for that. And I think that probably applies to Barcelona and Bayern Munich as well. So I maybe I'm wrong. My feeling is that his opportunities are higher within Italy than outside Italy for now. I think outside of Italy, the obvious spot would be Paris Saint-Germain because
agreed.
of all the ties he has there. But I don't think I expect that job to be there this summer at the moment, but maybe I'm wrong.
Which is ironic because it's a strange one. It feels like it was a yearly vacancy, and unless they won the Champions League, and the closest they ever got was the final, wasn't it? In that lockdown season, I think with Thiago Motta, what he has shown is, and we're saying this on the main pod, with Italian coaches typically, they're reluctant to go abroad, save for a few more recent examples. Obviously, we've seen the likes of Sarri, albeit it didn't really work out at Chelsea, Conte, Ancelotti. There's been a few. Di Matteo, albeit he played in England, so that's not necessarily someone without really a profile as a coach in Italy. So, but Thiago Motta is an atypical Italian in that he's a naturalised Brazilian. He played abroad. He was in the Barcelona academy. He played that long spell with PSG at the back end of his career. So I think he does have that international profile. He's clearly multilingual. He's well thought of around the European game. So I can see a much greater likelihood for him to go abroad in the short term than, say, someone like Simone Inzaghi, who we've mentioned before, who I think is attracting a lot of interest from elsewhere, but is still very monolingual and is sort of unapologetically so. So perhaps he could go to England and take an interpreter with him. That's just putting it out there. So
we've talked about Liverpool, who are top of the Premier League right now. The question I think that's perhaps more open in England is, would there be a club that's like half a step below that could be interesting to him? And
what about if De Zerbi goes to Liverpool and Thiago Motta takes over at Brighton?
Well, that's the sort of profile of job I'm asking myself about. Is would a Brighton type job appeal to him or not, or would he think in his head I can hold out and the PSG job's going to be there for me at some point, which is a higher profile job, whether or not it's a better job? That's a question that's more subjective, I think. I think if you're looking for one obvious, bigger potential job where maybe his profile could fit, if Manchester United decided that the Ten Hag thing wasn't working, then I think that's in that slightly unique bracket of a huge club with huge potential that doesn't have the level of recent success that Liverpool have, where you feel like you really have to bring in someone who is in the very top. Liverpool have to hire a name that's acceptable to people. I think that's the part.
I see it the other way around. I see it as United have to go for the name because they, if they're getting rid of Ten Hag, who was this sort of slightly unknown quality, who was the project builder, and it hasn't worked out. I feel like now with Ineos and all of the investment and Jim Ratcliffe and best in class and all this sort of stuff, I feel like they're going to have to go and make a real splash and say, okay, Guardiola's at Man City, Klopp has now gone. We're going to get the Klopp equivalent in the modern era now to try and bring in Manchester United, someone who's going to get results immediately, but is also going to build something. And I think it would be too much of a gamble on Thiago Motta, whereas I feel like Liverpool have got that within them to give their manager time, and the fan base is a lot more amenable to that. I'm not saying Thiago Motta would be that person, but yeah, I actually see it the other way. I'm just conscious. I know you're steering this debate, but I'm just conscious this is becoming a bit of a deep dive on Thiago Motta.
It has. I'm. You're right. I'm supposed to be steering this episode, and I'd forgotten that slightly. So next question. Let's move on to. Thank you for those questions again, Manu and Jill. Next topic that came up in a couple of questions was about Serie A reducing the number of teams that compete in the top division. Sanat Talmaki wrote, other than the big three and Roma, no other clubs were in favour of going to 18 teams for Serie A. For the big teams with UCL commitments, Champions League commitments, it makes sense. But aside from that, does an 18-team Serie A have any benefits? I also read an article recently about the Italian League pushing for more autonomy from the FIGC, the Italian Football Federation, similar to the Premier League in England. Can we expect any major changes in this direction? Tom Downs also sent a very similar question, interested in knowing any thoughts on Serie A reducing to 18 teams, pros and cons, and chances of it happening. Patrick.
I'm going to address the elephant in the room first and foremost. Big caveat here. Obviously, I'm not impartial on this in the sense that I'm freelance and I commentate on Serie A matches. I do 3 games every weekend. So moving from 20 teams to 18 teams economically would certainly hurt my pocket, because suddenly you've got 4 fewer rounds. You go from a 38-game season to a 34-game season. So I'm a dozen matches down. So I've got that out of the way. Personally, I don't think it's a silver bullet. I don't think by eliminating 2 teams from the current Serie A you do anything to address what has become well, this season we've discussed it, haven't we? A three-tier league basically. It's been the big three, the striped teams from the north, the Milan clubs and Juventus, and then that next bracket down, which is the teams chasing Europe, and then it feels like from 12th or 13th onwards down to the bottom, it's all a bit of a free for all, and we're getting progressively lower points tallies. I called a colleague up on him saying that 30 points is normally enough to stay up in Serie A. Traditionally, it was 40 points. It's not quite 30. I was looking through the numbers recently, but it's getting that way, and you can, which is a shame, really. And that's why I think teams like Inter, who, whilst they are wonderful and one of the best teams we've seen in a generation, it is indicative of the way the rest of the league is going, that a team can be approaching possibly 100 points. So do I think there's too much football being played? Yes. Should it be the domestic leagues that have to accommodate to allow for these new competitions that are bringing in more matches? I don't necessarily think so. I was looking at it in preparation for the Lecce Inter game. There's a great newspaper article. Can't remember which newspaper it was, but because Inter are already qualified for next season's revamped 32-team Club World Cup, which will be played in America, Inter, if they were to go all the way in all of their competitions next season, so we're talking about Serie A, they will be in the EA Sports FC Super Cup if that sponsor retains its rights to it. That's a two-team tournament we saw this year in Saudi Arabia with the Final Four. Coppa Italia plus Champions League plus Club World Cup. Inter could play 71 matches next season if they were to go the distance. So that is crazy, really, for what is it? Well, it would be longer than 10-month season, wouldn't it? But, I mean, you think about players like Niccolò Barella, well, almost all of Italy's Inter's team, who are all going to be involved in Euro 2024 pretty much. You know, you're going from suddenly you've got Euro 2024 this summer. Next summer, they're going to be involved in the Club World Cup. And the summer after that, you've got the World Cup, provided Italy can qualify for the third time in 3 tournaments, which I hasten to add is no guarantee. So I see where people are coming from. I mean, the players are tired. They're constantly, making it known either through interviews with the media or press conference appearances, or going via the trade union FIFPro, which represents all of the players, that they think they're playing too much football. Other people, some of the old guard will come out and say, well, in our day, we never had substitutes, let alone 5 substitutes. So I think that there is a middle ground to be had, but I think if you want to bring down the overall number of matches, everyone needs to make a concession. You can't just simply say the domestic league has to suffer, because, that also hurts Serie A's earning potential and the TV rights. So therefore the club's ability to generate revenue in the first place. It's all very well and good for Inter, Milan and Juventus voting for a reduced Serie A, knowing they're probably going to qualify for Europe. It doesn't help teams that are reliant on being in the top division, or if they go down, they get parachute payments, and also then there are fewer matches, so you can't market the league as much. And it's a really, you could have a 4-hour deep dive on this and still not really draw any conclusions. I'm just basically, I feel like I'm throwing spaghetti at the wall and seeing what sticks in terms of possible reasons for and against. I don't know if I even have an opinion on this or not. I know at this moment in time, I want to keep a 38-game league because it's what I'm used to and I know where I am with it.
This is the spaghetti on the wall thing. I don't know where it's come from, but there's like some people who believe that spaghetti on the wall tells you whether your spaghetti is cooked.
Yeah, on the ceiling as well, I think, isn't it? Yeah.
I was having this conversation with an Italian friend who lives over here about how some English people had been asking them if that was how they should check their spaghetti. And he was pulling a facial expression that indicated how I feel about it, which is you could just bite your spaghetti and see if it tastes ready.
And start by salting the water, please, as well. Please salt the water properly.
I think Patrick's covered the main points on that really well. I don't know if there's much more to add. I think if you want to say, does it have any benefits? Yes, it has some benefits you could argue for sure. The games played clearly affects the top teams the most. But for instance, this season, you could look and say, well, the Africa Cup of Nations was disruptive to a lot of teams. And if you've got fewer teams, you could try to arrange your schedule to accommodate tournaments like that and give everyone fewer games that overlap with international tournaments that happen during your season. You also, on the financial side of things, overall, the biggest winners are the biggest clubs. But I think that if you have 18 teams in the division, then the pie gets split 18 ways instead of 20. And the teams that don't get relegated probably make a little bit more money as well. So there are some benefits that could apply to everyone. I do think the biggest issue is the one again that Patrick highlighted, which is number of games being played by some footballers has got out of control. And as much as I know lots of people will want to roll their eyes and say rich footballers don't deserve my sympathy, it's not about sympathy. It's about what kind of product you want top football to be. And if players are physically exhausted, they're going to be injured more. You're going to see less of them anyway. So it's not the win that I think some people imagine it is. So I think that's pretty well covered. Stephen Cole had a question that I thought was a fun one to get to. I don't particularly support any team, but love Italian football and love going to visit games. What are your favourite grounds that you have been to or would like to go to that outside of the top seven, the top teams of the Seven Sisters? I will jump in right away and say, again, a club we have talked about on the main show this week. Bologna is always my answer place to go. I am completely open about my bias here. My family is from Emilia-Romagna, not from Bologna, but from a small town that's about an hour, a little bit less than an hour by train from there. I just think if you're going to go to a part of Italy to enjoy your time, Bologna is a really beautiful, incredibly walkable city that's fun to be in, where you're going to eat the best pasta in Italy, in my completely biased opinion. And
it's not at Christmas.
It's not Christmas. And the stadium's great. It's one of those ones that you're not as far away from the pitch as you are at some other Italian stadiums. It's got the tower, which is obviously a fun landmark to see. It's got a stand dedicated to Arpad Weisz, who's this extraordinary figure, the youngest ever manager to win Serie A, who was Jewish and also ultimately lost his life at Auschwitz. Lost his life is a wrong way to put that. Was murdered along with a horrendous number of people at Auschwitz, so has an incredible story, and one of the stands of the Stadio dell'Ara is dedicated to him. So some fascinating history as well with that stadium. It's a wonderful place to watch a football game, and lots else going on around it. That's always my number one vote. Obviously go to San Siro, but that's obvious. So Patrick, is there somewhere else you'd like to comment?
Marassi. I love the Stadio Luigi Ferraris. I'm a huge fan of that stadium. I always enjoy it when I go there. They call it the most English stadium in Italy. That's because, Nicky was talking about the fact that you're not too far away at the Dallara from the pitch. That's very true at Marassi. There's no running track, and it's just and they're not even in Italy. We have curve, so curved stands behind the goals. These are gradinate. They're actually much more like English stands as well. So don't ever say to a Genoa or Sampdoria fan, "Oh, do you stand in the curva?" No, I stand in the gradinata Nord, gradinata Sud, depending on whether it's Genoa or Sampdoria, respectively. And so I'm a big fan of that. And Genoa is a wonderful city as well. It's got a microclimate all year round. It's on the Costa Azzurra, which is Italy's extension of France's world famous Côte d'Azur. There's great food, focaccia, pesto. Absolutely,
focaccia's different in Genova. Get the focaccia there.
It's a lovely place to be. So there's that. I would definitely say that. And obviously the best thing about Marassi is whatever weekend you go in the 10-month season, you're guaranteed of getting to a game, which is great. A bit like when you come to Milan, you always know there's going to be a game on at San Siro because the two teams from the city share the same stadium. The other ground, which is very close to my heart, is the Via del Mare, because I used to live down in Brindisi, and I'm a huge fan of Lecce, the Florence of the South, as it's known for its Baroque architecture. There's Piazza Sant'Oronzo, which is the great central square, and the food there is wonderful as well. You've got the puccio, which is a sort of a flatbread that they fill with all sorts of things, but there's loads of stuff. I really like Lecce as well. The home support is very vocal. They travel in great numbers, but there's a real hardcore of support in Lecce. It's a weird one because Puglia, like Calabria and Sicily, some of the southern regions, they have big support for the big three, Juventus in particular. But there's a lot of Lecce fans who deliberately go even more the other way in their support of Lecce to actually counteract what they call, I'm trying to think of the term. They've actually got a specific term for people who support Lecce almost as their second team, but when like Juventus come to town, they go to the Via del Mare and cheer on the Bianconeri. So those would be my two. They're both coastal cities. Lecce's slightly inland, but it's a stone's throw from the Adriatic and the Ionian Seas. So depending, if you go in the summer, obviously you won't get to football, but if you go in the late spring, you have this wonderful thing where you can ask the locals, which beach should I go to? And depending on what the wind is doing, they will tell you which beach to go to. So if it's the Shiroka coming from North Africa, then you need to go to this beach. And if not, if it's the Levante coming from the east, and it's amazing place to be. And they also, one final thing on the culinary side, they they have coffee with latte di mandorla with almond milk as well, which is very nice of a morning. So there you go. And a pasticciotto as well.
But seriously, it's funny because we were joking about it. But I mean, honestly, if you're going to go watch football in Italy, then if you're not going there to enjoy the culinary part of it as well, then why are you going? Honestly, I mean, the football's great, but enjoy all of it. Make sure you get the full experience. So great shouts from Patrick there. We had more questions. I'd love to get to more, but I think we've already run out of time, unfortunately. So I'm really sorry we didn't get to more questions, guys. We will make sure we get to another Q&A episode before too long. Do keep them coming in. Really fun to get your questions and pick up with those. Going to finish with one comment, not a question, from Nick Newson on the Patreon app, who just said he wanted to say how much I enjoyed the History of the Derby d'Italia special episode. Stories, history, and the nostalgia were wonderful. It really brought things to life. Would love additional episodes like this to bring some colour for a fan that can't watch more than the match a week. Noted, Nick. Thank you very much for saying that, and we will try to.
We have a Milan derby coming up in the coming weeks, so maybe we could revisit it then. Yeah.
I think that's a really nice idea. And yeah, we'll try to make sure we we're trying to find the right blend and make sure we give you the current stuff, the nostalgia, all of it. So really lovely to hear people enjoyed that as well. This episode will be 100% free on the main podcast feed. I described it as a Patreon special at the beginning, so I'm sorry I just read that in the running order. Remember to subscribe, though, for Chronicles Tifosi Patreon membership to get all of the content we put out. There's a 7-day free trial available, and more episodes and videos like this, all content in full on the Patreon and ad-free as well. Thank you very much, Patrick. And
my pleasure.
We will see everyone next week.
Serie A Chronicles is a Chronicles production.